What we got here is a failure to communicate.
He knew exactly what he wanted to do.
I don't want to be hoggish. Lon, you want a piece of it?
Well, Paul is a class act.
My God, you are some beautiful woman.
He's a totally unpretentious person.
Never say never.
He loved to have fun.
$500 says you choke right now.
You think this boy is a hustler?
Picture this. Westport, Connecticut, September 2008. Hollywood legend Paul Newman draws his final breath at age 83, taking with him one of the entertainment industry's most carefully guarded secrets.
The Oscar-winning actor and director Paul Newman has died of cancer at the age of 83. Paul Brennan reports now on the life of a screen legend.
But what the world didn't know was that before his death, Newman had already recorded the most brutally honest confessions ever captured by a major star. Confessions so devastating they wouldn't be published until 2022.
There are discoveries that you make about yourself as you get older, and that discovery is interesting, especially if it happens in parallel with your own.
14 years after he was safely in his grave. For over 50 years, Paul Newman had been America's golden boy, the blue-eyed heartthrob who seemed to have it all. The perfect marriage to Joanne Woodward, the successful career, the charitable work. But behind that dazzling smile lay a man tormented by guilt, alcoholism, and a secret affair that nearly destroyed everything he claimed to love. Tonight, we're revealing the 5 shocking truths that Paul Newman finally confessed in his posthumous memoir, The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man. From his devastating affair with journalist Nancy Bacon that broke Joanne Woodward's heart, to his battles with alcoholism that turned him into what he called a functioning drunk, to the tragic death of his son Scott that he blamed on his own failures as a father. This isn't just another celebrity scandal. This is the explosive testimony of a man who spent his final years trying to make peace with a lifetime of deception. Why did Newman record these confessions? Because in 1986, at age 61, he began an extraordinary project with screenwriter Stuart Stern. The only rule was complete honesty, no matter how painful the truth might be. Newman originally planned to destroy the tapes, but they survived his death, giving us an unprecedented look into the tortured soul of America's most beloved leading man. What triggered Newman's need for confession was the tragic death of his son Scott from a drug overdose in 1978.
The icon often being described as a high-functioning alcoholic. Tragically, substance abuse seemed to run in the family, with one of his children, Scott Newman, succumbing to a lethal overdose at the age of 28.
The loss shattered Newman's carefully constructed facade and forced him to confront the man he really was beneath the movie star image. For the first time in his life, he was ready to tell the whole truth, no matter who it hurt. The first shocking secret, the devastating affair with Nancy Bacon. Our first revelation centers on the affair that Newman himself called the most shameful act of his life. His relationship with journalist Nancy Bacon that nearly ended his marriage to Joanne Woodward. In 1968, Paul Newman was at the peak of his career, preparing to film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He had been married to Joanne Woodward for 10 years, and they were considered Hollywood's golden couple. But behind the perfect public image, Newman was struggling with what he would later describe as an addictive need for sexual conquest that threatened to destroy everything he claimed to value. Nancy Bacon was a divorced journalist and model who first met Newman during a charity photo shoot in California. She was intelligent, attractive, and completely different from the Hollywood actresses who usually surrounded him. In her own memoir, Legends and Lipstick, Bacon would later describe their first encounter with devastating honesty. I sneaked a look at Paul as he talked easily with the crew. He appeared vulnerable and boyish in his tan Levi's and moccasins. Then our eyes met, and I found myself waiting, as he seemed to be, for the others to leave. What happened next would haunt Newman for the rest of his life. The two began an affair that lasted nearly 18 months, from 1968 to early 1970. Unlike his casual flings, this relationship went deep. Bacon wasn't just another conquest. She was someone Newman genuinely cared about, making the betrayal of his wife even more devastating. The affair played out while Newman maintained his public marriage, appearing at award shows and events with Joanne, while secretly spending extended periods with Bacon in Los Angeles. His wife remained in their Connecticut home with their 3 daughters, unaware that her husband was building an emotional connection with another woman that threatened the foundation of their family. Bacon's own account of the relationship reveals the depth of Newman's deception. She wrote, "We sat like strangers in my hotel room for a few minutes, nervous like children, and then he kissed me, and after a while he did something he really didn't have to do. He fell to his knees and clutched me tightly around the waist, his head pressed against my breast, and he whispered, 'Please,' like a small boy asking for a dime." The relationship became increasingly intense as Newman found himself torn between 2 women. Bacon described how Newman's guilt began consuming him. "When Paul came back to Los Angeles, he came to see me, and he glowered at me and said, 'I mustn't be happy. I'm playing Reinhardt, and Reinhardt is a dark man, a man in a black mood.' And later I noticed that the red in his eyes dimmed the blue, like in a bad color print. The end came in 1970 when Bacon realized the relationship had become toxic. She wrote, "I think it was late spring when I realized how sordid the affair had become. Why didn't he call me his girl? Then I knew why. He was really a square. He felt he was sinning, and he was always drunk. Or maybe in his guilt, he was looking for death. I realized the affair was straining at the seams now." When the affair finally ended, Bacon withdrew from the entertainment industry entirely. She moved away from California, married, and lived quietly until her death, never speaking publicly about Newman again. Her silence was purchased with Newman's obvious remorse and perhaps his gratitude that she chose not to destroy his marriage and career. Newman never publicly acknowledged the affair during his lifetime, but those close to him knew it had changed him. In 1983, 15 years after the relationship ended, Newman took the unprecedented step of renewing his vows with Joanne in a private ceremony. His daughter, Melissa, later revealed that Newman himself suggested the ritual as a way to tighten a bond that had once been loosened. In his posthumous memoir, Newman finally admitted the truth about this period of his life. He wrote, "I lived 2 lives at the same time, acknowledging the guilt that followed him for decades." His confession revealed that the affair with Bacon wasn't just about sex. It was about his deep-seated need to sabotage his own happiness, a pattern that would repeat throughout his life. The most devastating aspect of Newman's confession was his admission that he had genuinely loved both women. While he called Joanne smarter, deeper, and kinder than anyone I've ever met, he also acknowledged that Bacon had touched something in him that he couldn't forget. This wasn't just another Hollywood fling. It was an emotional betrayal that cut to the heart of what marriage meant to him. The second shocking secret, the destruction of his first marriage. Our second revelation exposes Newman's pattern of infidelity that began with his treatment of his first wife, Jackie Wheat, a betrayal that he later called his greatest failure as a human being. In 1953, 28-year-old Paul Newman was performing in the Broadway play Picnic when he met Joanne Woodward, who was serving as an understudy. He had been married to Jackie Witt for 4 years and had 2 young children at home, with a third on the way. Jackie had put her own acting ambitions aside to raise their family, while Newman pursued his career. She trusted her husband completely, a trust that Newman was already planning to betray. The affair between Newman and Woodward began almost immediately, but Newman kept it secret for 5 agonizing years. During this time, Jackie gave birth to their 3rd child, Stephanie, in 1954, completely unaware that her husband was living a double life. Friends later described Newman as tormented during this period, drinking heavily and becoming increasingly distant from his family. Newman's deception was systematic and cruel, while Jackie stayed home caring for their children in their Staten Island home. Newman was building a relationship with Woodward that he knew would eventually destroy his marriage. He later admitted, "I was a failure as an adulterer," but this wasn't because he lacked commitment to the affair. It was because the guilt was eating him alive. The betrayal became public in 1958 when Newman finally divorced Jackie to marry Woodward. The scandal rocked Hollywood, as Newman had been seen as a family man who was different from the industry's notorious playboys. But the real devastation was personal. Jackie had to rebuild her life as a single mother of 3 while watching her ex-husband's career soar with his new wife. What made Newman's treatment of Jackie particularly cruel was how he handled the aftermath. She never remarried, devoting her life to raising their children, while Newman became one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Those who knew Jackie described her as never fully recovering from the betrayal, spending the rest of her life wondering what she had done wrong. Newman's own children from his first marriage paid the price for his choices. His son, Scott, in particular, seemed to struggle with the knowledge that his father had abandoned the family for another woman. Friends later suggested that Scott's drug problems were partly rooted in his anger toward his father's treatment of his mother. In his memoir, Newman was brutally honest about this period of his life. He wrote about feeling unworthy and acknowledging that his behavior toward Jackie was unforgivable. He described living with the knowledge that he had destroyed an innocent woman's life for his own selfish desires, and that this guilt had shaped every relationship he had afterwards. The pattern Newman established with Jackie would repeat throughout his life: the need to sabotage stable relationships in pursuit of something he thought would make him happier. But as he later admitted, the happiness never lasted, and the guilt accumulated with each betrayal. Most painfully, Newman revealed that Jackie's quiet dignity in the aftermath of their divorce made his guilt even worse. She never spoke publicly against him, never tried to damage his career, and never used their children as weapons. Her grace in the face of his cruelty forced him to confront the kind of man he really was beneath the charming public persona. The third shocking secret: the alcoholism that nearly destroyed everything. Our third revelation exposes Newman's decades-long battle with alcohol, a struggle that turned him into what he called a functioning drunk, and nearly cost him his family, his career, and his life. Newman's relationship with alcohol began in college, but escalated dramatically during his rise to stardom in the 1950s and 1960s. By his own admission, he was consuming a case of beer daily, followed by hard liquor in the evening. What started as social drinking evolved into a systematic form of self-medication that he used to cope with guilt, insecurity, and the pressure of maintaining his public image. The drinking became so severe that Newman described himself as having 2 personalities: the sober man during the day who could function professionally, and the drunk who emerged each evening, often becoming cruel and unpredictable. Friends and family members interviewed for his memoir described Newman's transformation when he drank, from charming leading man to someone they barely recognized. Joanne Woodward bore the brunt of Newman's alcoholism throughout their marriage. In one of the most shocking revelations from the memoir, Newman admitted that Woodward actually threw him out of their Connecticut home at one point, forcing him to sleep in his car in their driveway until he agreed to address his drinking problem. This incident, which was kept completely secret from the public, showed how close Newman came to losing everything that mattered to him. The alcohol also affected Newman's relationship with his children. He admitted to disappearing into another room at the end of each day to drink alone, becoming unavailable to his family precisely when they needed him most. His daughter, Melissa, later described the vibe of tension in the house that would sort of come and go, directly tied to her father's drinking patterns. Newman's drinking reached its peak in the early 1970s, coinciding with his affair with Nancy Bacon and the increasing pressure of maintaining his double life. He later wrote, "It's an interesting challenge how far you can take the drinking without really self-destructing. In the early 1970s, I think I took it as far as it could go before realizing I had taken it that far. The turning point came when Newman began racing cars professionally. The physical demands and safety requirements of racing forced him to confront his drinking in a way that his acting career never had. He couldn't afford to be impaired behind the wheel of a race car, and this gave him the motivation he needed to finally address his addiction. But Newman never fully conquered his alcoholism. Instead, he learned to manage it, reducing his consumption, but never eliminating it entirely. He described this as the delight, the luxury of being out of control, admitting that part of him enjoyed the risk and chaos that alcohol brought to his otherwise controlled public life. The most tragic aspect of Newman's drinking was how it connected to his son, Scott's own addiction problems. Newman later wondered if his own relationship with alcohol had provided a model for his son's destructive behavior. When Scott died of a drug and alcohol overdose in 1978, Newman was forced to confront the possibility that his own addiction had contributed to his son's death. In his memoir, Newman wrote, "Many are the times I have gotten down on my knees and asked for Scott's forgiveness. I ask for forgiveness for that part of me which provided the impetus for his own destruction. What would it have taken to avert that? I'm not certain, but I don't think I could have gone into films and been a movie star. I couldn't have drunk." Newman's honesty about his alcoholism was unprecedented for a star of his stature. He admitted to blackouts, dangerous behavior, and moments when he marveled that I survived the consequences of his drinking. His confession revealed how close he had come to destroying everything he had built, and how the guilt from his addiction had shaped his understanding of his failures as a husband and father. The fourth shocking secret: the tragic death of his son, Scott. Our fourth revelation centers on the most devastating loss of Newman's life, the death of his eldest son, Scott, from a drug overdose, and Newman's belief that his own failures as a father directly contributed to the tragedy. November the 20th, 1968. 28-year-old Scott Newman was found dead in a Los Angeles hotel room, having consumed a lethal combination of tranquilizers, pain pills, and alcohol. The official cause of death was ruled accidental, but those who knew Scott understood that he had been struggling with addiction for years, following a pattern that seemed to mirror his famous father's own relationship with substances. Scott had grown up in the shadow of his father's fame, watching as Newman left his mother Jackie for Joanne Woodward when Scott was just 8 years old. The divorce shattered the family, and Scott never fully recovered from the sense of abandonment and betrayal. As he grew older, he turned to acting himself, but was constantly compared to his father and found lacking in the eyes of critics and casting directors. Newman later admitted that he had seen the warning signs but failed to take them seriously. He wrote, "I kept thinking he was going through a phase of adolescent bad judgment. I never thought it would be fatal." This admission revealed Newman's pattern of denial when faced with uncomfortable truths about his family, the same denial that had allowed him to carry on affairs while convincing himself his marriages would survive. The pressure of being Paul Newman's son was immense. Scott felt he had to prove himself worthy of the Newman name, while simultaneously resenting the advantages and disadvantages that came with it. Friends described him as talented, but deeply insecure, constantly seeking his father's approval, while angry about the circumstances of his parents' divorce. Scott's addiction problems escalated throughout the 1970s. He had been injured in a motorcycle accident and was taking prescription pain medication, but his drug use went far beyond medical necessity. Police records showed multiple arrests for drug-related offenses, and Scott had been receiving treatment from a clinical psychologist for personal problems at the time of his death. The night Scott died, He had dinner in his hotel room with an associate from his treatment clinic. The details of his final hours paint a picture of a young man who had lost hope. The combination of drugs and alcohol he consumed was clearly lethal. Whether intentionally or not remains unclear, but Newman later tortured himself with the possibility that his son had chosen to end his life. Newman's response to Scott's death was to throw himself into work and avoid dealing with the grief directly. But in private, he was consumed with guilt about his failures as a father. He wrote, "Was there some way I might have told him he didn't have to be like me? That he didn't have to do macho things and could just be himself?" The most devastating aspect of Newman's grief was his understanding of how his own behavior had shaped Scott's problems. Newman's alcoholism, his affairs, and his abandonment of Scott's mother had created a template for destructive masculine behavior that Scott seemed unable to escape. Newman later wrote, "Being a star throws everything out of whack for your kids." In his memoir, Newman revealed the depth of his anguish over Scott's death. He described getting on his knees to ask for his dead son's forgiveness, then immediately recognizing the futility of the gesture. There is even something grotesque in saying, "Forgive me." The energy up there that represents that kid will just give me the finger and say, "Well, what am I supposed to do with that?" The tragedy of Scott's death forced Newman to confront the cost of his fame and his choices. He established the Scott Newman Center for Drug Abuse Prevention, but privately wondered if his public success had been worth the price his family had paid. His daughter, Clea, later said that Scott's death moved Newman to do some deep soul-searching that ultimately led to his decision to record his brutal confessions. The fifth shocking secret, the final confession that changed everything. Our fifth and final revelation centers on Newman's decision in 1986 to record the most honest autobiography ever attempted by a major star, and his original plan to destroy the tapes to protect the people he loved. In 1986, 61-year-old Paul Newman was approaching the later stages of his career when he embarked on an extraordinary project with his close friend, screenwriter Stuart Stern. The plan was to create an oral history that would capture the truth about Newman's life, not the sanitized version that appeared in fan magazines, but the real story of his struggles, failures, and regrets. The project had only one rule: complete honesty. Everyone who participated, Newman, his family members, and his closest friends, had to agree to tell the truth, no matter how painful or embarrassing it might be. This wasn't going to be another celebrity autobiography filled with carefully crafted anecdotes and public relations spin. This was going to be the real Paul Newman, exposed in all his complexity and contradiction. The interviews continued for 5 years, resulting in thousands of pages of transcripts. Newman spoke candidly about his childhood trauma, his failed relationships, his alcoholism, and his guilt over Scott's death. He also invited others to share their memories and perspectives, creating a comprehensive portrait of his life from multiple viewpoints. But as the project neared completion, Newman began having second thoughts. The revelations were too honest, too damaging to the people he loved. He worried that publishing the truth about his affairs would hurt Joanne, that exposing his failures as a father would damage his surviving children, and that his admissions about alcoholism would tarnish his public image in ways that could affect his charitable work. Newman made the decision to destroy the tapes. He told Stern that he couldn't go through with the project, that some secrets were too dangerous to reveal. The recordings were supposed to be burned, taking Newman's most honest confessions to the grave with him. But fate intervened. The tapes survived, hidden away until after Newman's death in 2008. It wasn't until 2022, 14 years after Newman died, that his family decided to honor his original vision and publish the memoir. Editor David Rosenthal, working with Joanne Woodward and Newman's daughters, carefully assembled the material into the book that Newman had been too afraid to release during his lifetime. The published memoir revealed why Newman had been so reluctant to tell his story. His confessions were devastating in their honesty. He admitted to being a serial adulterer who had hurt every woman he claimed to love. He revealed himself as a functioning alcoholic who had prioritized his career over his family's well-being. He exposed his role in his son's tragic death and his failure to be the father his children deserved. But Newman's confessions also revealed his capacity for growth and self-reflection. In his final years, he had tried to make amends for his failures. He renewed his vows with Joanne to acknowledge the pain his affairs had caused. He threw himself into charitable work, partly as penance for his selfish behavior. He tried to be a better grandfather than he had been a father. The memoir showed Newman as a man tormented by his own contradictions, capable of great generosity and terrible selfishness, able to create beautiful art while destroying the people closest to him. His decision to record these confessions, even knowing they might never be published, showed his desperate need to be understood as he really was, not as the world imagined him to be. Perhaps the most shocking revelation was Newman's admission that he had lived his entire adult life feeling like a fraud. Despite his success, his wealth, and his acclaim, he never felt worthy of the love he received from fans or family. This insecurity had driven him to sabotage his relationships and medicate his pain with alcohol, creating a cycle of self-destruction that nearly consumed him. When Paul Newman died in September 2008, the obituaries celebrated his achievements as an actor, philanthropist, and family man. The world mourned the loss of a Hollywood icon who had seemed to represent the best of American masculinity. But the real Paul Newman, the man revealed in his secret confessions, was far more complex and troubled than anyone imagined. The publication of Newman's memoir in 2022 forced a reckoning with his legacy. Could his artistic achievements be separated from his personal failures? Did his charitable work balance out the pain he had caused his family? Was he a hero or a cautionary tale about the costs of fame and success? Newman himself seemed to anticipate these questions in his confessions. He wrote, "I'm aware that in some ways it's my nature to deprecate everything I do." But his willingness to expose his failures also showed remarkable courage. The courage to be seen as he really was, rather than as the image his publicists had carefully crafted. The most profound aspect of Newman's final confession was his acknowledgement that he had wasted much of his life running from the truth about himself. His affairs, his drinking, and his emotional unavailability had all been ways of avoiding the deeper work of becoming the man he wanted to be. Only in his final years had he begun to understand that real success meant being honest about his failures and trying to do better. Today, Paul Newman's legacy remains complicated. His films continue to entertain audiences around the world. His charitable foundation has raised hundreds of millions of dollars for worthy causes. But his posthumous confessions have also revealed the human cost of his success, the wives who were betrayed, the children who were neglected, and the son who paid the ultimate price for growing up in the shadow of a troubled father. Newman's story serves as a warning about the dangers of fame and the importance of authenticity. His confessions remind us that even our most beloved heroes are flawed human beings, struggling with the same demons that plague us all. The difference is that Newman finally found the courage to face his demons and tell the truth about who he really was. What do you think about these shocking revelations from Paul Newman's secret confessions? Does learning about his affairs and alcoholism change how you view his movies and his legacy? Should we judge celebrities by their personal behavior or separate their art from their lives? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective on how these confessions change Newman's place in Hollywood history. If these revelations about Hollywood's golden boy opened your eyes to the reality behind the glamour, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're Vintage Vault, where Hollywood's most buried secrets finally surface. And we're committed to bringing you the truth about your favorite stars, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Next week, we're diving deep into another shocking confession with, at 89, Steve McQueen's ex-wife finally revealed the violence that destroyed their marriage. Ali MacGraw's recent interviews have exposed a pattern of abuse and control that McQueen's fans never knew existed. The king of cool had a very dark side that Hollywood covered up for decades. Until then, remember that in Hollywood's golden age, even the most beloved stars carried secrets that would shock their fans. This is Vintage Vault, and we'll keep digging until every buried truth sees the light, because the real stories are always more compelling than the myths.